Would it help any if we were all together in one spot?
Yeah, if we all
You might want to just zoom.
should we sit in the floor?
Yeah.
In a circle? There you go.
Normally we set up a circle of love in this room when we have our staff meetings, but this is not quite that shape, and I didn't think it was going to be nearly that friendly.
We've had such good attendance at all of our meetings.
Yeah, it's been packed.
Yeah, it has.
Throw in
I guess we were
every year.
very happy at the end of the last
Holidays and
meeting. I know,
everything
you
was
said
off.
we were going, so.
I rather suspect that it's been so long since the last meeting, it fell
Yeah.
off of everybody's radar.
There's that.
No, but this was an added one, right?
Yeah, this was an added one.
And so they got an added email. Or
I only got 3 no's. Those guys get credit for at least responding. So,
Well, you'll get all your
start
questions
choosing
is
answered.
it possible that they thought 7 instead of 6? Well, so for those of you that are here, we're recording, so that'll be something that people can at least share. I don't know if you need to take written testimony or something, but the idea today was to come back to the Community Advisory Committee and talk about really quite a few things that have happened since our last meeting, I think, anyway. A lot of information kind of came forth and came together in kind of a recommendation. And so we've taken that to a couple of sounding boards at both the Planning and City Commission work session and the Transportation Advisory Committee and back to the Planning Commission. And so Dan and I have kind of done that. And we just recognize that there's enough information that has come together and really potentially feeling like we need to make sure the community, Henry's on the Transportation Advisory Committee, so he knows most of this already, but just go ahead and present that and give an opportunity to discuss it. And so that's what we're going to do tonight, right? So,
That's right. Susie, anything from your perspective? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, Susie Wright from Kittleson. Happy to be back. Thank you for those of you who are here. We appreciate that. Now we'll be going through, I think, John's right, there's been a lot of activities since our last meeting. I think as I go through my presentation tonight, you'll see that the activities that have gone on have been to try to just solidify and move forward with the recommendations from this committee at the third meeting, which has just resulted in a little bit of fine-tuning. And so we're here to bring back kind of the results of those fine-tuning that show how it's being proposed for adoption.
the other thing, we should introduce Levine because she's been on the Technical Advisory Committee. She works with John Macklin. She's very familiar with our situation. So we needed, John, I think, couldn't make it. Or you
John
really
was
wanted
never
to
a
be
member
here.
of this committee. He was there as a resource, so I'm here in his stead.
So great. Why don't we go around entirely and reacquaint ourselves with each other too, Mike, please?
Mike Besner, Assistant Director of Transportation for the county.
John Lewis, Public Works Director for Oregon City.
Lidveen Rahman, ODOT.
Sean Recklinger, I serve as the city's consulting traffic engineer.
Alit Furman-Goodrich, Oregon City Public Works City Engineer.
Nathan McCarty, AKS, Development Stakeholder Group.
Thank you.
Henry McEnroth, Oregon City Transportation Advisory Committee Representative.
Great.
Kelly Reed, planner with Community Development Department in Oregon City. Dana Webb, Public Works.
Thanks. So you guys will see on the agenda that the main reason we've reconvened is to kind of, as John said, just reacquaint you with the process and the deliberations to date and see if you have any kind of final comments on the alternative mobility targets and the recommended improvements before it goes back to Planning Commission. So thanks again for being here tonight. I'm reminded by the technical team that we don't need to move our microphones. They're pretty well pinned down on the table. So resist the urge to pull it towards you. You don't need to hear yourself coming through the mic, but it's airing out to the listening audience. So thank you. Susie.
Yes, all right. So as shown on the agenda, I'm just gonna bring you back up to date, give you a quick little reminder of the 3 meetings that we had before and what those, thank you, kind of what we covered. Our first meeting was just about a little under a year ago, where we talked about the project purpose and background. We started talking about whether there were any viable alternatives for the 213 Beaver Creek Road intersection that we should continue to explore kind of in more detail than they were able to during the transportation system plan. And in our second meeting, which was in March, we started talking about what are alternative mobility targets, what are some of the measures that would be suitable, and along with that, we brought a lot of information about travel time through the existing intersection and in the corridor to use as a baseline and talking about different measures. In our third meeting in April, we brought that kind of all together, talking about what some of the more near-term feasible lower cost improvements would be for Beaver Creek and 213. The largest one, and I'll talk a little bit about some more elements of it, the largest one being a westbound right turn lane, and how that would benefit operations and how that would tie together with an alternative mobility target to kind of reduce kind of the amount of change that we would need compared to the existing target. And we took some guidance from that meeting, and I took another couple slides on that. So that's where we've been. As I said, in that April meeting, we got some pretty clear direction from the committee that we went forward to do some refinement, and so we're here tonight to bring that back to you before it moves forward to the Planning Commission and City Council for consideration as a TSP amendment. Just to recap kind of what's in the existing city's existing TSP. At Beaver Creek Road, there is really no capacity increasing improvement. There was an extension of left turn lanes to just increase the queue storage, and that project has actually been constructed. And there's another safety project for some advanced warning lights to help reduce potential for rear end collisions on Highway 213. That is not been installed yet. At Redland Road, there's a project in the TSP. It is considered the phase 2 project of the jug handle, and it would extend lanes to allow us to have 3 through lanes at the 213 and Beaver Creek intersection. That project is, I think, is all the way through final design. It basically has its design plans ready. It was part of the jug handle, but that phase of it was not funded at that time. So that project still remains in the TSP, but in the city's TSP, it is was not identified as a financially constrained project. But it is still in the TSP, and in discussions that we've been having with ODOT, and as the city is sitting at the table on the next regional transportation plan update, that project is in the current regional transportation plan and is proposed for the regional transportation plan update to be a financially constrained project at the regional level. So if that remains the case, we may not need to go forward with alternative mobility targets at Redland Road. But I'm going to go forward with my presentation tonight and explain to you what our proposal was for Redland Road, and just note that if in fact the phase 2 project at Redland Road stays in the financially constrained TSP, then we likely, or actually would not be moving forward with requesting an alternative mobility target at Redland, just at 213 Beaver Creek. So, to recap the existing mobility targets, so both current and proposed, there's a volume to capacity based ratio target, and the existing standard at 213 and Beaver Creek Road is a maximum volume to capacity of 0.99 for the first and second highest hours of the day. At Redland Road, it's a little bit different because it's considered to be part of a regional center, and its standard is a maximum VC of 1.10 for the first hour and 0.99 for the second hour. So So those are the existing standards or targets that we would be potentially modifying. And then just kind of background on the purpose of the project. The city's TSP really essentially states that although outright zoned development is still allowed, anything that is not outright permitted, so therefore zone changes, in particular for the zone changes that would need to occur for the concept planning that's been occurred, those projects are dependent upon the alternative mobility target being put in place at 213 and Beaver Creek Road, and it also states the interchange area. But that's, as I said, something that we might be able to change. So when I talked about some of the interim improvements or lower cost improvements that we could do in tandem with the alternative mobility target, the alternative that's moving forward is for a right turn lane, westbound right turn lane from Beaver Creek Road to 213. Let's see. So that is right here. And the way it's drawn, it looks like it could almost exist today, but that's actually a shoulder today. But you'd need several hundred feet of widening to make this merge. That improvement we found provides a great benefit in particular to the morning peak hours. So while it wasn't having a huge benefit to the evening peak, because that's not the main flow of traffic, it was having a great benefit in the morning, which was really reducing the number of hours each day that the intersection's experiencing congestion.
Susan, one question that I had on this one. The estimate was, it mentioned, estimate includes eliminating the second westbound turn lane. So that was that scenario that we talked about.
Yeah, it's a very minor part of the estimate because it's primarily restriping. That was to reduce this to a single left turn lane instead of double, so that you could have more storage for Maple Road, which is shown is down here, more left turn storage to help cars get out of the through lanes and into the Maple Lanes storage, which through the working with the committee, we kind of learned could be a problem for, as you get a lot of left turners here, sometimes this area is congested because people can't get into the Maple Lane storage. So this would be primarily a safety improvement. Our traffic analysis showed that that moving from a double to single left turn lane here was not having a significant capacity increase, or impact. We did not recommend it as at this time as part of this project, but we recommended that the city continue to look at that in tandem with potential improvements at the intersection of Maple Lane, and I think they're going to be moving forward with looking at that more closely.
And you think just generally that could happen without could that happen earlier than the free-flowing right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
A question,
Yes.
would anybody care to hazard a guess as to when we could legitimately expect to see this on the ground?
I'm going to look at city staff on that one because it.
You mean what would trigger the free-flowing?
No, when might we see these improvements, considering that we actually need them now?
Yeah, I think the fact that we're seeing problems now, it's more looking at the other priorities across the city and how much we've got in the bank for transportation SDCs.
Maybe 5 years out or something?
5 to 10 years seems like a range.
So at Redland Road, as I mentioned, there is an improvement in the TSP, and it is to essentially construct additional through lanes at 213 in Redland, which would also allow for double left turn lanes here. So this project is, as I mentioned, there were some little bit differences. It was in the city's unconstrained TSP just because it's largely going to be funded with regional or state dollars. The city is saving, does have a component of their SDC set aside for some participating in that project, but it was just not identified as financially constrained in the city's TSP, just because of the kind of unknowns and large amount of state and regional dollars that would be going to it. But it is in the regional plan, financially constrained plan. And so based on that, having discussions with ODOT that we then in fact maybe could consider that a reasonably funded project for the purposes of zone changes and plan amendments. And pending that all to everybody to be on the same page with that, that would mean if that is the case, we do not actually need to move forward with an alternative mobility target at Redland. Because that improvement essentially would be allowed to be considered when evaluating zone changes and plan amendments. And Levine, you had a question as a TAC member, which I think maybe I'll just address, because it did come up at our citizen meetings as well, where we had, for this intersection, tried to identify if we could do a near term, lower cost improvement to just convert the southbound right turn lane to a through right to get a little bit more capacity at this intersection. But in looking back a little bit further, the long-term widening is all planned to this south or east side, and that has to do with the vertical clearances at this bridge in addition to available right-of-way. And we learned that we really could not add any additional widening here due to the lack of clearance for this bridge. And so that idea of a near-term solution was kind of removed from further consideration.
So, Henry and Nathan, since you're our audience, I just want to make sure, do you understand what we're now talking about with regard to this, possibly not including this alternate mobility as a request to the OTC?
On the Redland.
On the Redland piece?
We'll go with, Nathan, you go first.
My only question was with regard to the constrained funding. So does that mean that the project would potentially have funding through ODOT, and that's why it would be taken off of being needing an alternative mobility standard, or is it because there is no funding for the project?
There is no real funding.
Okay.
But it is in the financially constrained RTP. And what that means is the region, the metro, the counties, and ODOT and Primet have come up with an estimate of what we can reasonably expect to have by 2027 and then again by 2040, based on federal, state, and local funding sources that have a history. So that already includes like your SDCs, the city's share of gas tax, all of that, but it also makes assumptions about, how much federal funds we might get, and we may or may not get those. But the RTP is being done to meet federal requirements, so the way you come up with those estimates has to be done in a way that the feds will accept. But it's not real money. It's
Planned money.
It's planned money, yeah.
Yeah, it essentially says, we as a region have agreed to how much money we think will be coming into the region
Yeah.
as a whole, and we as a region have some agreed upon priorities for that money. And so there's kind of regional agreement that this project fits within the funding that's anticipated. But it's not like a capital improvement list where we have actual allocated dollars for the next 5 years and that's on it. So it's basically an agreed upon regional priority that should be able to be accommodated within the regional budget or
And
projections.
what's happening, in addition to the RTP, is that there is talk of a regional funding measure, in part to fund the Southwest Corridor for transit, but they're going to add, roadway and active transportation package to this referendum, this ballot measure, to make it palatable to the voters. And so by being in the financially constrained RTP, both these projects are candidates for this new money if it happens. So that could make it real.
Okay. Henry, you care to comment at all?
Well, basically, if I understand it right, because it's a regional center, we're allowed more congestion. We're expected to have more congestion. Because of the physical constraints that are there, in order to make a meaningful improvement, it's just about a total rip out and rebuild situation, which is a major no-no probably. So therefore, it's probably going to stay as is for the foreseeable future, simply because there's not really any other way to do it.
Until such time as the new funding becomes available to make the improvements.
Or the city wins the $100 million water.
That's right. We have our scenario, where federal funds become more available associated to unknown infrastructure packages, but it is useful to have in the plan so that you are ready and right. Living.
Yeah, and eligible. And then if it does go in, because projects are not sort of a continuum, then the performance of the intersection will be above the standard for a long while.
And by the time all the stars align, we'll be back re-examining the whole thing anyway.
Well, that too.
And as practical, every 5 years or so, planning never stops, unfortunately, but so, yeah, it's appropriate to be adaptively managing and kind of watching it.
Okay.
May I just ask a clarification, Susie? So I think that, Lidwine, did you just say that both projects are in the regionally constrained list, or is it it's just the Redland?
It depends which RTP you talk about. So the Redland is in the currently effective RTP, but we've already had one round of project submittals for the 2018 RTP, and both are in the new, but not yet adopted RTP financially constrained, right?
Yep. By both, you mean, what is the second one?
Beaver Creek.
213.
The right turn lane? Yes. Okay,
Yeah, and
Just the right turn.
just the right turn lane.
And I just want to be clear to, assuming others chime in, we are, the alternate mobility that may not proceed to the OTC is just at Redland and 213. Okay. The Beaver Creek and 213 stays and would be submitted to the OTC.
Oh, great, okay, thank you.
Yep. Because, so Redland has an improvement, and as we kind of went through this whole process, we kind of realized we don't have an agreed upon feasible improvement for 213 and Beaver Creek. We have a way to improve it with the right turn lane. And then with some direction to the city to continue to look for and work towards a larger, longer-term solution there. But what we came out of the last meeting was some, agreement that at least at 213 and Beaver Creek, that the alternatives that will meet the existing target were not cost feasible, say an interchange at 213 and Beaver Creek. And at Beaver Creek Road, there was consensus that yes, we want to stick with the volume to capacity based ratio-based target, and we will be willing to accept a certain number of hours per day to be exceeding that threshold. Some of the work we've done since then was to determine exactly what those hours are and how many. We were also told, yes, let's add that westbound right turn lane into the city's TSP and make sure it's cost constrained. At Redland Road, again, we also heard, yes, we want to stick with a BC-based alternative target. And again, we'll expect that it'll be exceeded for a certain number of hours per day. And I'll get a little bit into more of the details of that. And to keep the unfunded improvements in the TSP. And so that was the direction. So since that meeting, we've been working with ODOT on the kind of a technical and review process. We made a decision to move from a alternative mobility, a BC standard that was based on peak season, and move to a standard that's based on average season, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. There was some refinement to the wording of the target, and looking at not just saying you can exceed the target for 3 hours, but they wanted to say what is it the first hour and the second hour and the third hour to be kind of stair-stepped and specific. And then they asked that we do a queuing analysis at 213 and Redland Road to make sure that we wouldn't be, by changing the target, having a impact with queues spilling back to the interchange. So based on that work, as well as some other input from the county, there's been 2 new projects proposed to be added to the TSP. So one is Beaver Creek Road sidewalk infill, south of the Coltrane Path to north of Marjorie Lane, and some additional safety improvements at Highway 213 and Beaver Creek Road, such as raised crosswalks, additional bike lane striping through the intersection, ladder-style crosswalks, signage, and buffered bike lanes where possible.
Would the extended width right turn on 213 have to be included in our TSP?
It is.
Yes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the recommended mobility target at Beaver Creek. So the top line that has 4 boxes of red is really without the right turn lane. So we really want to focus here on the bottom line, which is with the right turn lane. So the target we're kind of recommending is based on that lower line with the right turn lane. But I think this kind of helps show you the significant benefit that improvement gets as far as how many hours a day you have over the existing target of 0.99. It really moves you from 4 hours exceeding that target to really just 1 hour, basically being right at 1.0. So the recommendation is that during the first, second, and third hours, a maximum BC of 1.0 shall be maintained. So that's basically looking at these 3 hours, so a maximum BC of 1.0 during these 3 hours of the day. And recommending that the westbound right turn merge lane plus the safety improvements be included in the TSP. And that we had a switch of when we measure this from a traditional 30th highest hour, which really equates to evening peak on the peak month of the year, which is in the summer, to average season, which is in May. And there's a couple of reasons why we recommended or that asked us to look at that switch, and we agreed and recommend it. And I'll talk about that a little bit here. But
Can you go back? Because I had to answer this, and I think Dana helped me. I just want to make sure I'm sure about it. That 5th highest hour, so the hours, the peak hour, the second, third, those were as an intersection, right?
yes,
The intersection's peak hour was at 4 p.m. The intersection's second highest peak hour was at 5 p.m. And those numbers represent the worst of that turning movement at those hours. Is that right? But then the 1.34 looks worse. Obviously it is, but that's just for a particular movement, right? And in fact, the intersection, is that?
Yeah, so in a signalized intersection, the BC is an average based on several movements. Like the 4 that conflict the most, it's usually, say, a northbound left, southbound through, eastbound left, westbound through. As you take kind of the 4 highest movements as you think about how a traffic signal operates. So it's basically, you could consider it almost an average. It's called critical movement. So it's the volume to capacity when you look at the 4 highest movements that are competing for time. So that's an average for the intersection. The reason the morning is so bad is because of the westbound right. It's having a huge impact on that analysis.
So it's the fact that the traffic is more at the problem points, but
Yes.
there's less total volume going through the intersection.
Yes. Thank you. Okay.
How do you know that there's less total volume going through? Not from looking at this, right?
No, not from looking at this.
Okay,
Yeah, from looking at the counts. and
The overall counts.
yeah.
The overall counts. Yes, we collected 12 hours of counts at the intersections. So I'm not going to spend too much time here on Redlands. This is the area where we might not need to move forward with it. But the proposed, if we did need to move forward with it, was that for the first and second hours, that a maximum VC of 1.0 be maintained, and for the third hour, 1.05. This isn't too far off the existing target, which did I say 1.1 for the first 2 hours? First hour.
No, it's
First hour.
1.1 and then
So we're not
2.1.
too far from the existing target, except that again, we're going to be talking about measuring on the average, a typical average weekday. So May is a average month of the year statistically, versus summer. We were
And
asked.
we're comfortable with that method because the OTC has approved it in other locations.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but maybe I can jump ahead one slide here. It's kind of why going average season instead of 30th highest hour is what we traditionally call peak season. Went that direction to be more consistent with how ODOT, the alternative mobility targets that ODOT has approved in other regions. That seems to be kind of the first step, is instead of looking at peak season, let's look at more of an average or off-peak. Because it brings that number down, you're getting closer to actual capacity, which means you can measure it a little more realistically if you're trying to monitor it. As you get numbers way well over 1, they get a little more unrealistic. So by setting a target that's more close to 1, by looking at an average season, it's easier for us to measure and monitor in reality instead of just in future projections. But it doesn't change the amount of growth that is allowed, because we still would be setting this target based on the same future growth assumption, but we're, whether we're measuring it in July versus May, we're measuring a lower volume. I'm going to set a lower standard, but the projections are both based on the same land use assumptions. So the switch is not going to be allowing us to allow more or less land uses. All of the scenarios essentially allow the city to assign zoning to properties that's consistent with the comp plan and the area plans that they have adopted. Any questions there? Just to go back to a little bit of what do these targets, what do these really mean? We had earlier in the project talked you through a number of travel time studies that we had done. And this is real data from last year that showed kind of the 85th percentile travel time through the Beaver Creek Road intersection. And it included a couple 100 feet north and south or on either leg of the intersection. And we tested this for all different movements, and this is an average. But what you can see is the travel time to get through the intersection. You can see how it goes up in the morning, goes back down to kind of normal daytime baseline, and then it peaks in the evening at about 200 seconds to get from a couple 100 feet before the intersection to a couple 100 feet after the intersection. And we know from measuring that out in the, or from our intersection operations analysis, that translated to, oh, I don't have my VCs on here. Intersection delay that we got from our analyses, that translates to actually, sorry, I'm a little confused here myself, what these columns are. average travel time versus 30th highest hour. So sorry, this is kind of our estimate of comparing that difference between peak season versus off-peak season. But I think the thing to look at here is really, what is the travel time through that intersection estimated to be in the future, 2040, and then with the right turn lane. So although we are showing, this would indicate about a 20% increase in delay without the right turn lane. We're really looking at only about a 10% increase in delay with the right turn lane, kind of looking at those average conditions. So trying to say, if we look at increased congestion and volumes at that intersection, based on the travel time studies and what we estimate the delay increases at the intersection, these are our kind of best estimates at how in reality that would look at the interchange, or how that would look differently driving through the intersection. So at 200 seconds, you're likely, you may or may not be getting through in one cycle. By 2040, most people will need to wait at least a cycle to get through the intersection. Does that make sense to folks?
Yeah, just to clarify though, we're talking about distances measured 1,000 feet from the intersection, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so those 200 seconds of travel time that we actually measured from where our units were, the analysis actually said the average intersection delay is 46 seconds. And that the average intersection delay going up to 83 and then down to 65 with the westbound right turn lane. But then when you add those to the overall average travel time to the intersection, it's not a significant increase in your overall travel time through the intersection. Okay, so getting to the recommendations. So at 213 and Beaver Creek, we're recommending the city to amend their, city council to consider these amendments to the TSP to adopt an alternative mobility target for a maximum volume to capacity ratio of 1.0 for basically 3 hours a day based on annual average conditions, with the addition of projects into the TSP for the westbound right turn merge lane, safety improvements, and the sidewalk infill. And at the time the report was written, we were recommending an alternative mobility target at Redland Road for that maximum VC of 1.1 for 2 hours a day and 1.05 for the third hour, and keeping in the improvement that's in the TSP. And so if we all come to agreement that we can consider that improvement financially constrained, we will not be moving forward with a change of target at Redland Road. So our next steps are to take the TSP amendment recommendations to the Planning Commission. We have a meeting set with them for January 22nd, and then hopefully taking their recommendations to City Council on February 7th. And then we will continue to work after that point with ODOT to take the alternative mobility target to the Oregon Transportation Commission so they can amend that in the Oregon Highway Plan. Thanks. And with that, we're just here for questions.
Questions, comments?
And we will figure this out before you go to the Planning Commission.
You have 11 days. Confident.
I have a question.
Please, Tony.
Would be if we tend to see appeals here. If the city commission, planning commission, city commission make a decision approving the recommendations and the decision's appealed by who knows who, will the staff proceed to take that to the OTC, ODOT staff, because that's who presents it to the OTC.
we would wait till that's resolved. We would only take something to the OTC that is adopted locally and effective. Well, it can be effective until we approve it, but
So assuming we adopt and then at the highest level, which is the city commission, and then JQ system comes in and appeals it, what then would that, would be adopted? I don't know. Kelly, do you have any thoughts on whether we could implement that or?
If something is appealed to LUBA, which is the Land Use Board of Appeals at the state level, it could come back, they could remand it, it could come back to the city for reconsideration. So it's not really final yet if it gets appealed. And we have a 14-day appeal period after a decision's made. So we would know within 2 weeks after that city commission meeting whether or not it's going to LUBA.
Okay.
So I have a question, Levine, which local agencies have adopted a standard that is based on average traffic volume rather than 30th highest hour?
I think Seaside has.
Because I'd like to see what their code, their local code language is, so that we can develop that in parallel.
I can get you other examples, but I
Yeah.
believe Seaside has done that, and since it's Region 2, I don't sort of have that at my fingertips,
Okay.
but I can.
That's fair, thank you.
And if you want to just go, not wait for me, just ask Terry Cole, he can answer that question.
Folks, so we're just, I guess, wanting to hear if there's any other comments on either, pursuing the targets, or if that still seems the right way to go, given all the things we learned about over the last year. And or any final comments on the recommended improvements that Susie's laid out. We don't need to keep you here all night, but
I'm gonna have a question, but it's going to be along the lines of what would the future look like if we did not adopt any change, or if it's not allowed? Because I don't know that that's been discussed in any of the meetings that I remember anyway.
not recently.
Yeah.
So if we didn't adopt the alternative, if OTC didn't adopt the alternative mobility target, what's the implication?
Right.
Susie or Kelly? John?
That's a planning question.
Yeah, well, so right now, in our code, we allow any use that is permitted or conditional in the current zones does not have to meet any mobility targets at these intersections. So we are allowing those uses to move forward without having to really study their impact on this intersection. Most of those permitted and conditional uses are all already accounted for in the modeling that's been used, and so we've kind of already planned for it in a sense, and we know that it's not going to the models show that the intersection would exceed capacity at some point before 2035, I think, but it's not like it's going to happen tomorrow. In addition, our current code does not, because we don't have an alternate, any other mobility target identified for these intersections. If somebody wants to apply for a zone change to maybe get more density, more residential units or something on a particular piece of property, then they have to, they have to show they meet the targets But right now, we don't have targets for them to meet. So essentially, there's a moratorium on any zone change that would add traffic through this intersection. We approved a zone change a couple of years ago that, and the only reason we were able to approve that is because they placed a trip cap on themselves, saying that, okay, here's what the current zoning traffic generation would be. We're gonna change the zoning, but we're going to not build full capacity of that zoning. We're going to cap ourselves to have that same number of trips of traffic that that previous zone would have allowed. So that was the only way that we could approve that. And so if that is kind of status quo, we cannot approve zone changes if they add traffic to the intersection. Adoption of these new targets raises, slightly the standard, so that if somebody does want to propose a zone change that adds traffic and they can show that they meet those standards, then we can approve it. So essentially, if we don't adopt anything, we're going to continue to have a moratorium on large developments that require zone change. Please correct me if I'm John, please.
That's true in the city.
Yeah, in the
I think
city.
Development can happen out in the county.
Right. So yeah, and what we can't, and we can only control what's in our city. So we can't control big new developments that happen outside of the city that put traffic through the intersection. So, and we don't have any way of measuring the impact of permitted uses currently. So adopting this allows us to ask everybody to meet those standards.
Henry, I think the biggest, if I think Kelly stated it well, I think the biggest effect will be on properties that are inside the urban growth boundary but outside of the city that need a zone change upon annexation when they move forward with development.
That annexation could occur, but there'd be no additional density due to that annexation.
Right.
And we have a lot of concept plan areas, the Beaver Creek Concept Plan, Park Place, South End, where a lot of new development is anticipated. And we've identified needs for housing and industrial lands, and all of that is kind of in the category of what John just said. A lot of that land is in the urban growth boundary, but not in the city yet, and does not have city zoning. And so it would almost, it would stifle kind of those concept plan areas a little bit if we didn't adopt this.
Well said.
I think that clarifies
Yeah.
it totally.
Right. No, that's a good, you're
Just
hired.
real quick, because I'm not a planner either. If you did annex the property that has county zoning, does it automatically translate to city zoning, or does it keep the county zoning until it gets rezoned?
Keeps the county zoning.
The latter.
It keeps accounting, but when, but it comes in typically with the lowest density zone category zoning in the city. So for example, if it's a low density residential, it'll come in as R10, which is our least dense zone, even though we have 3 different zoning categories within that land use, and the other zoning categories are still considered low density residential, but they allow more units than R10 zone.
So it
would.
does become a city zoning?
Just not at the anticipated concept plan.
No, but I'm
Yeah.
saying, but an equivalent
Do you
zoning?
know, John?
Well, I think that's the problem. I think that under city code, trying to remember how Kerry has explained, city attorney has explained this, I think it automatically is supposed to come in under the city zoning.
Mm-hmm.
But in essence, they're not going to be allowed to actually develop until this mobility issue is resolved. And to further complicate things, most of this development, because it's inside the urban growth boundary, was assumed to occur when the analysis was performed for
Right.
the TSP.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets tricky with annexations and how the zoning gets assigned, but essentially, when annexations happen, whatever land use category it's in, we don't automatically assign like an average density. It's always the lowest density, and so we do end up seeing a lot of folks that want to apply for zone changes because in essence, we wouldn't even meet our own goals if everything stayed at R10 or the lowest density zone.
So they wouldn't really have a motivation to annex.
That's right, pay higher, yeah. Higher tax rate, no additional
There might be a
development.
different motivation.
There might be, but for the most part, they might be getting all the same services.
Yeah.
Well, but under county zoning, we have a lot of the recent, some of the recent annexations that have occurred have been county 1 unit per 10 acres or 1 unit per 20, which is a big difference from the 5 to 7 units per acre allowable under city zoning at R10, R8, or R6. So
But can you do that then if it annexes and then it's suddenly more density than what it is when you have this problem? I guess that's the question.
well, that's the zone change issue that requires the developer to analyze the impact, and they will end up showing that the impact at 213 and Beaver Creek has a significant effect and needs to be disallowed because they're not meeting mobility standards.
Exactly, so does that mean they can't annex? We don't have to waste a lot of time on this, I was just curious because it's an interesting problem.
Most annexations come in as
Get to the knot of the
annexation
issue,
zone
though.
change together.
It's illegal.
No, I
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
but here you're saying you can't.
So I think we had one recently that,
We did raise one question, though. Does development in county have a similar restriction due to this intersection as development in the city does?
I don't know the answer to that because it's not what I really do. It's not my expertise, but when we have development in the county, they have to meet mobility standards. So I mean, I know it's something, and maybe it has to meet city standards because this intersection's in the city
And it's an ODOT highway.
and it's
So
an
it would
ODOT
have to
highway.
be
So actually,
ODOT.
we would have very little say in what that standard probably is. But I would imagine that we have to meet whoever the jurisdiction's standard is. But I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, you do, but there are some other considerations that are not transportation considerations, which is that, as John mentioned, there are some holding zones, and they are there for the explicit reason to not have premature low-density development, but to wait until you actually go for urban level densities and intensities, and with the services and utilities and all that go with that. So we don't want to fritter away that land, basically, but that's a land use issue, not a transportation issue. And we don't want them to, build on septic tanks when we're not ready to build the sewers. And so there's a lot more to that whole urbanization sequence of events than the transportation part of
Almost
it.
inseparable, as we know, from just common living and good urban planning, which includes transportation. The two do go together.
Yeah.
So hence why we're here and seeking alternative mobility standards.
I did send a text to Laura. It says, if the county property is annexed, does the zoning remain per the county or does the zoning change to the city's lowest density? She says, stays at the county zone and the city administers it. We essentially put restrictions on it so they can't do much with their property.
There you go.
and that's why they have to apply for the zone change to whatever city zoning is planned for that area.
Yeah.
So I mean, just to recap at this table, and, Henry and Nathan were both here, robust discussions about kind of that limitation and accepting the alternative mobility standard, knowing that we can't quite at this time fund our way out of the correct fix, but trying to keep, trying to look at the middle path of what are the, improvements. Susie described some of those that are being made today and in the city's current TSP and CIP, while, planning reasonably for the future and not gridlock. So still walking that, trying to kind of walk that middle line, and seek, it sounds like, still seek the alternative mobility standard at Beaver Creek, just not at the Redland. And Nathan, do you have, Nathan or Henry, any further comments kind of on that, having listened to the updates? Yeah, you're good.
One thought I had is that it seems like we've discussed this at all three of the citizen involvement committee meetings and had all these different players at the table. That it's not just a city problem, this intersection. It's a regional problem. And so it seems like it would be important for it to be included for both these intersections to be included in the regional transportation plan for that reason. Because we're just discussing now this growth that some of it's in the city, some of it's in the county, and you have ODOT facility running right through it, getting to many different locations.
Thanks, that does make sense. Well said. Well, any other final kind of observations, questions, or discussion for the good of the order? I don't mean to hold you here, but so the next step is to, as Susie said, head towards Planning Commission on the 22nd. So stay tuned for that. I don't think they're going back to the Transportation Committee in between them, but please do stay tuned. And certainly I know that the city and the consulting team really appreciates the guidance of each of you and the rest of the committee today. Those were not easy discussions. It's not an easy intersection, a very important intersection for the region. Anything else for the good of the order?
Did we have a date of our first planning commission meeting up here?
January 22nd.
Okay.
Susie could maybe flip to that slide for the...
So I would say this,
Yeah.
it would, it's unfortunate that we don't have more folks here tonight, but, I think having participants, especially from the development community, Nathan, testify that, whatever their position is, testifying would be helpful at that planning commission and maybe city commission hearing, because I think otherwise it's
a lonely meeting.
It's a lonely meeting. Yeah.
I mean, and Nathan, as you said, this statement was, you kind of tied it up nicely, is that hearkening back to the conversations around this table, it is, with the hamlet of Beaver Creek, this is a regional issue. And so having it on the regional RTP is the appropriate move, gives the city just more, support as you participated in those discussions at Metro. So, good call. And feel free, as John said, to relay that to the Planning Commission too, if you guys are available on the 22nd. Anything else, Mike, your perspective?
Well, I just asked my expert.
Everyone's texting their experts.
I thought he was texting me and he just stopped. So I might not have the answer. I had the little dots going.
Right, oh yeah.
I just asked him if we have a and I know we do, but if we have a development in an unincorporated area on Beaver Creek Road, do we require compliance with ODOT and Oregon City mobility standards at 213? We have to, I'm sure.
It'd be your go-to.
But
land use planning
I want confirmation from a guy who actually knows.
Yeah.
Well, you undoubtedly do
Yeah.
if the development is of large enough size that it requires an analysis.
Right.
We have our standards in the city, and the small developments do not have to do any kind of an operations analysis. So you move to 25 units in Malala, it's not going to show that it would have a significant effect on any ODOT facility. So probably does not require analysis.
Sure.
That's for a zone change. It's obviously currently zone lands on the model existing.
But an Amazon fulfillment center in Malala might be a different story.
That'd make us all sit up straight. John, any final closing comments from you or from Dana? Kelly?
I'm thankful that two of you showed that count as audience, and I'm thankful that you came to help answer some questions. And I'm thankful for you guys for being here to present, because I do think that we'll have it on record and recorded and available for folks to look at, so.
Did you want to ask for any specific recommendation from the members of the community advisory group, John?
Well, I think the recommendation hold, if I could suggest, I would say the recommendation holds from meeting 3, that this was merely an update, and to see if any, major turns of direction, since we're not at kind of quorum. I didn't hear any major turns of direction from these gentlemen, just kind of questions and comments, additional comment is what I would recommend.
Yeah, Kelly's right though, I was supposed to ask that. But,
Right, yeah.
yeah, we don't really have, I forget about the important details. But yeah, we don't really have a
We'll
quorum here, do we?
proceed. I mean, I guess, would you guys object to proceeding with the way that we had laid out at the 3rd advisory committee meeting? Does that still sound like the path, appropriate kind of balance and path forward based on what you've heard? Nathan first, then maybe Henry.
Yeah, definitely for Beaver Creek and Highway 215.
Yeah.
May not be necessary for Redland, but already done the work to get to this point, so I'm trying to continue to pursue.
Thank you. And then Henry?
While I may have objections on principle, principle doesn't really apply here. It's more like practicality, and from practicality standpoint, there's not a lot of options.
Right, unless
I
we
mean,
have a very deep pocket somewhere.
Yeah, and like I said, unless we actually win the $500 million lottery so we can fund something.
Well, I think that's what the advisory committee recommended at our last meeting, was to keep a larger build on, a wish list, so that if there were large infrastructure funding, it has happened before under the, President Obama's administration, so to have kind of some plans on book, if there are, unexpected sums of money for which the region can apply, so the advisory committee recommended keeping that kind of on the book. But short of that, you're okay proceeding, it sounds like.
Yes.
Hang on, I just got my answer.
Late breaking
And
news.
it's very consistent with what you said. We have concurrency standards that reference meeting other jurisdiction standards at their intersections, but most development isn't at a level that requires a traffic study. It has to be a minimum of 20 trips in an hour. So if you have less than that, we're not even going to check, because there's nothing to check, right? But if it's at least 20 trips an hour, they have to do a traffic study and then show they meet all that.
Thank you. All right, then final, are we okay to adjourn? You guys okay to have 15 more minutes of your life back? All right, okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and with that, we're adjourned, and please stay tuned. Thanks for all your service.
So I got a question for Oregon City.